All right, they want us to start.
man.
We have 30 minutes, so I'm going to jump in. Thank you, everybody, for coming into this virtual room. It's good to see everybody. I'm going to just take a few minutes to talk about inspire your inner self and really kind of share some of my story with you and some things that I've gone through, realizing I was extremely emotionally unhealthy. I don't know if you know anybody that's had like a heart attack and they go through it and then they talk to you about how they're going to change their diet, they're going to change it, they're going to have an exercise program, and their life really changes after having a red flag like a heart attack happen, and then they, you live life a little bit differently. Well, I had an emotional heart attack several years ago, and I had more blockage in, not my real heart, but in my emotional heart. I had more blockage than a triple bypass patient, and I learned some things. I'm still learning. I'm still coming through and trying to be emotionally healthy, and COVID has tested that. It's testing all of us, and so I'll just talk a couple minutes about that. But my first step really in my road to recovery of getting unblocked, and that'll make sense as I go on what the blockages are, is that I actually have emotions. And it wasn't that I didn't think I was emotional or had emotions. It was that my family of origin kind of taught me that I didn't know what to do with them. You weren't allowed to process them in my home. Emotions weren't something that we talked about. It wasn't something we processed together. You just buck up and you move through and you get over whatever it is you're supposed to get over. There's work to do, there's life to live, and so we're not going to get kind of bogged down in any kind of emotional stuff. And the model that I was discipled under wasn't a whole lot better because it was the same approach, only spiritualized. And so if you were facing, sadness, doubt, I was spiritually raised under a strong death to self message. And so that's all self manifesting itself. And so you kill it. You don't deal with your emotional side. The spirit man needs to be empowered. The spirit man needs to be stronger. And so pray more, study the Bible more, and not really, again, deal with this thing that we call emotions. And if you're old enough to remember Popeye the Sailor Man, he was really out of sync in his body. He had huge forearms, little tiny biceps. Or more currently, if you're somebody that goes to the gym, dude, don't miss leg day. You're going to look funny if you miss leg day. And so for my life, I was really ignoring a very important part of who I was, the mind, will, the emotions. And it's really Bible that we deal with all the aspects of who we are. In fact, the Bible sees us as a whole person with all these pieces working. Thessalonians says, may God himself, the God who makes everything holy and whole, make you holy and whole. Put you together. Man, I needed to be put back together. Spirit, soul, and body, to keep you fit for the coming of our Master Jesus Christ. And so the promise is that the Holy Spirit wants you whole. He wants you put together, and that God's going to keep you fit in every aspect of your life, including our emotional life. Keep us fit until the coming of Jesus. I loved how all the speakers kind of alluded to this, and the idea of being, if you're not, Dave Patterson talking about it'll come through. It'll come through in your preaching, it'll come through everywhere. So just a little context. I didn't have a lot of help with this, not at home and then not in my spiritual life, because I would describe it as being over-spiritualized. And you can never have too much Jesus, so I'm not going to allude anything like that, but I will make it sound that way because that's the characterization that I learned, that you just ignore it. I just want Luke chapter 10, really familiar passage about Mary and Martha. I'm going to read it. But if you'll do me a huge favor, do yourself a huge favor, unplug all your sermons that you've preached on this, all the ideas that you've had on this, and they're all good. We've all preached, the idea that get to Jesus' feet, which means, and hear his word, which means more Bible and more prayer. Now, that is a great application of this, but that's not what the story's about. That's not the intentionality of what's happening. And let me help you see what's going on here. Now, what happened is they entered a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha welcomed Jesus into her house. That's good. You want to welcome Jesus into the house. Martha's doing that. And she had a sister called Mary, who also sat at Jesus' feet and heard his word. So we're excited about Mary. Martha was distracted, important word, with much serving. And she approached him and said, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Therefore, tell her to help me." And Jesus answered and said, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and troubled about many things. One thing is needed, and Mary has chosen that good part, which will not be taken away from her." And I identify with Martha in the story. Martha is the take lead person. She's the control person, making everything happen, making sure that everything does happen. But there's an obvious conflict between her and her sister. And so she does probably what many of us would do. She steps up to direct traffic. We've got to move forward. We've got to get the party going. Jesus is here. There's things to do, food to serve, a lot of details, and that's not unimportant. And so as the leadership person, she's driving that forward. And then she says, "By the way, Jesus, my sister's lazy, and she's got these issues, and I want you to fix her while you're fixing the problems." I was a fixer. I tend to still kind of go there. I will take charge. And Jesus speaks to Martha, and he says to her in response, interesting response. What he says to her is that there's something standing in the way of you finding your way to my feet. There's something standing in the way of you finding that place. And he says what it is that you're worried, and let's just put anxiety and worry aside for a minute. But he says you are troubled about many things. And that's really interesting because it literally means it's troubled in the mind. It's this idea that your mind is racing most of the time. Your thought processes and your inner dialogue is really accelerated. It's happening. You're kind of a multitasker in your head, Martha. And I can super relate to that. And so we would say it this way. There's a lot of noise in our head. And so Jesus is saying this place that you're at where you have all this noise in your head is keeping you from getting to my feet. Now, that's where I want you to unplug the idea for a minute. It's not keeping you from the place of sitting down, hearing the word, and praying. That's not what he's saying. It's a party. It's a gathering. It's been hosted. Jesus is in the room, and what he's saying to Martha, Martha, you are troubled in your mind. You cannot be present in the moment. Your sister is sitting here. We're enjoying relationship, but you can't enjoy the relationship because your head is in a million different places. And I had to be honest that when I began to do some work on this, and my adult children would say, "Dad, you can be in the room, but you're not in the room. You're in a million other places. We're watching your eyes. You're kind of listening to what we're saying, but we don't have all of you." My staff would say it this way. This was how it would happen. We would do Christmas, and I know you all probably do Christmas in a way that it's advantageous, to preach the gospel to the lost. And we do multi-services. We put a lot of work. It starts really early. It won't be happening this year. But in past years, we would do it, and we would have, the highest numbers of salvations. We would, the team would be high-fiving, and they would be celebrating, and they would be doing all those things. And then they would look at me, and I'd want to talk about Easter. And I couldn't stop long enough to celebrate the win of Christmas, which really we should have celebrated for weeks. As soon as it was over, I'm done. It happened. It's in the past. Let's move on. I was troubled in my mind. And my staff would say, "Can you not celebrate the win? Can you not enjoy the fact that we just worked all this time for this moment and you're only allowing it to be 30 seconds long instead of maybe weeks and months?" My wife would say, "There's nothing left over for me, that I compete with the church for you." and that when you come home, you're not present. And so we would say it in probably this way, maybe you've heard it this way, that you're not emotionally available. Not emotionally available. And I wasn't emotionally available. And Martha wasn't emotionally available. And what Jesus was saying is, you can't be present in the moment. You can't sit. Your sister gets it. You don't. You're troubled in your mind. Your mind's racing. So let me talk about what kind of causes that and some of what was happening in my life, because my relationships were typically transactional. I will give you something, I will get something. But my relationships weren't really relational. I couldn't sit and be present, and a person couldn't have all of me. So statistically, the noise in our heads, the science would be, and the statistics would be, that it's a result of unresolved conflict. And John talked about this a little bit, of having, you're all of a sudden experiencing something you've never experienced before. So my family of origin and my upbringing in church would be, ignore that and just get to God, get to his feet and read the scriptures. Well, I can go to his feet and I can put in a couple of hours of prayer, but it's not changing because my soul is blocked. I have soul blockage. It can't flow. I've got soul blockage that can't even get to the spiritual practice. I can't connect to Jesus the same way I can't connect to people. That can be present in the moment. So statistically, if we were to just get a whole bunch of leaders like we have right now in a room, you have 30% of what I would call your emotional capacity. We live with 30%. And that's going to translate to our fruitfulness, that's going to translate, relational, it's going to translate to every aspect of our life, because we're running on less than what we're capable of having. And the 70% is filled up with unresolved conflict. That's the science. We know that. And so that conflict is anything that happens that creates pain in our life that we didn't process properly, we just stuck it in there. And we said, I've dealt with it. I'm good. I'm fine. What happens is, like a hockey player that goes out on the ice and starts to play injured, you're going to end up, a knee's going to blow out. Something traumatic's going to end up by happening, because 30, 20, 10, and it's the people that rely on us the most that are the recipients of that, what's not there and it's not available for them. So typically, just like when we eat food, you eat food, your body processes that food, it keeps the good, and then it gets rid of the bad. And without being graphic, God gave you your behind, and the behind for the reason. When you process the bad stuff, it goes behind. And so it stays out of your life if you're processing properly. And so the process emotionally would be a pain experience, and then process it, and it takes time. Time. I don't like time. I want to be an efficient person. I don't want to waste time. And so after the process and the time, you move forward. Well, I'm like, I don't want to do that. I just want to move forward. Let's just get by it. Let's just get through it. And as I came to my family, my staff, and my wife predominantly brought me to a point of saying, this has to change or else. And I didn't like the or else. And then realizing that there was some really unhealthy patterns in my life. And I'm sharing this one because I think this one was most useful for me, and to identify as I started looking at and taking an inventory of the things that I had gone through in my life but not really dealt with. And one of them was a traumatic ministerial betrayal by my best friend who wanted to be the pastor of the church and started moving in that direction. And it was very traumatic. And 3 or 4 other things I could list that, without comparing stories, we all have those moments that really rock our world. And so when the betrayal was happening, I went to the feet of Jesus, the way I knew to. And what I concluded was this was a distraction. The event was a distraction. The pain was a distraction. It was keeping our church from moving forward. It was keeping me from moving forward. We're not going to be robbed by the enemy, by this evil doer. We're not going to, as I start spiritualizing all this stuff, I skip the process and time element and go right to moving forward. Well, I had done that my whole life. but it builds up and it blocks. And so I actually did some work with Henry Cloud, and I just want to, one aspect that he has in his book called Changes That Heal, and actually right now at our church at Harvest, we're taking the whole church through Churches That Heal. And I would highly, I'll take 20 more times, recommend the material. And you can read about the 4 things that he sees as necessary for us to grow in a healthy, in our bodies, in our souls, in our spirits, and disciple in a healthy way. I just want to talk about the first one that he talks about, and I ask you a question. So the question is this: if you were to have a crisis in your life, take your contact list, and think about this right now because I want you to come up with an answer. You take your contact list, and you were to call somebody, you're in trouble, you know you're in trouble, you have faced a crisis in your life, something terrible has happened, and you're going to phone that person. Who is it? Who's that person? And just take 3 seconds, 2, 1. Hopefully you have a person's name. Second question, would you actually call them? Would you call them? And that second question had to be real for me because I had people I was in a relationship with, but I hadn't invested and I hadn't connected with them. Because if you can't, see, here's the deal. If you can't sit at somebody's feet and really be there, Jesus said that was a problem with Martha. Troubled in her mind is racing, filled up capacity. Your mind is everywhere but here. You're physically here, but you won't connect. You won't have healthy attachment to other people. Without healthy attachment, you can't be vulnerable because you don't feel safe. You don't feel safe, you cannot talk about what you need to talk about. A lot said right there. And so I didn't call anybody, and I didn't even have the ability to create those attachments. I convinced myself that I could get everything I needed from Jesus. And I refused to ask for help. Because asking for help, family of origin, was a sign of weakness. Asking for help in my discipleship model that I was discipleship under was that I hadn't prayed enough and I hadn't gone up on the mountain like Moses and come down with the 10 Commandments. And every good man of God should be able to do this. So you don't ask for help, because help is really a form of weakness. Interesting, 1 Peter 4:10, and I've had to learn this. As each one has received a gift, minister to one another, and this is not in a church service, minister to one another as good stewards of the manifold, crazy, broad variety grace of God, God's delivery of system. First thing I had to learn, God's delivery system of grace is other people. Frank Satius is watching. He's one of those distributors of grace to my life. My wife and I just sat with he and Chris and Oshawa around a table for 3 hours as we shared a meal, opening our life up, connecting. I was hopefully fully there. I'm not sure. I'll let him decide. Finding safe people that you can find support, that they cheer for you, they love you, they get you, you've connected with them, and they're in your corner. And it's not selfish, it's necessary. It's okay to be that leader that doesn't give out all the time. And that's how you get heart blockage if your flow is only going one way. And so we begin to find people that we can connect with. It's the answer to the blockage. It's the answer to learning how to process through pain in our lives. I have 3 men in my life. I've been 5 years in this process. I have 3 men, and they're all in MFI. Just have to work out that way, because that's where my life has been for 30-some years. And you can, this is what if you relate it to anything I've been saying, and it can't be your spouse. It can be, it should be, but it has to be outside your spouse. And I have, Pastor Frank has an aspect that I process certain things with him. I have another leader, I process certain with them. And then I have another former pastor, but now in a different, not pastoring, but a leader in a not-for-profit. And I process, and I kind of know which ones, and they know me, which one is gonna kind of work the best. And what I mean by process is to be able that when I'm stuck I made a call just last night. We have a lot of things at the church happening. I have some family stuff happening all at one time. And I know that when I'm carrying all those things, I want to ask for help before I need it. And so I let those people, I make them aware. Hey, just so you know, I'm going through some things. I'm going through X, Y, and Z. So finding some people you can do that and Henry Cloud's got a book called Safe People. And you can read that and find out who you should choose, but real quick. The average person has 700 people in your contact list. And get that down to a farm team of about 30. If you're not sure, you may already have some people you're doing this with, then I would encourage you to do it more. If you're not doing it, you need to do it. If you're in a staff position, that doesn't necessarily mean you're senior pastor. In fact, that can be hard sometimes because you need a place where you can open up and you're saying the hard things and you're saying how you feel. It's not a reality, but it's your reality in the present moment. And as you process it out and get rid of it, it doesn't have to stay your reality or show up 5 years down the road. You can get rid of it, but you do have to talk it through and process it with somebody who gets you and gets what you're going through. So what you can do is find a person that you think might work, stick your toe in the vulnerability pool. And for me, I have a special needs son. And so it might go something like this. My special needs son is 21. And there's just a lot of aspects. I'm his primary caregiver. And I might say something like, man, it has been so difficult in the last month with Aaron because he's just creating some emotional stuff at home with his younger brother. And we're not sure how to program his day out because he's just graduated from high school and there's no programming in Cornwall. And I just begin to kind of unload the difficulty. And then, man, I tell you what. And I said my whole life I would never, ever, and we will never, ever, but put him in an institutional situation. But a month ago, I was ready to do that, entertaining the thought. Talking out loud. What would my life look like if I could put him in an institutional setting? And I needed to say it and process that out and not have, and here's what happens. So I might say something like that. And so then I wait for the response of that person. If the person on the other side of the table gets squeamish, oh crap. Hey, how's the church going? And they change the topic, it's not your person. Just right there and then, it's not your person. Other extreme, they go into, oh, well, let me tell you, Roy, how you can fix that. There are 10 steps to you. And it's like, no, you don't want the fixer person, another Martha in your world, disconnected to you, going into transactional relationship. Oh, you need something? Great, let me give it to you. No, you don't want transactional relationship at that moment. You just need someone to look at you and go, dude, that sucks. And then help you process that through, that it's something you need to get rid of. You're ridding yourself of it, but not until your body, your emotional sense begins to process that. And so that, I want the person who's now, I don't want that person to give me an answer. I want the person who's going to lean into me and go, and then they exhibit some level of vulnerability where they go, man, I can't imagine how that feels. When I've gone through difficult times, this is how I have felt. And so that they're willing, so vulnerability is a good sign of safety, that they're not going to try to trump you, come over you, be like, Darth Vader, Luke, I will be your spiritual father and solve all these problems. You don't want that. So that's a good way to get started, and then continue meeting and continue developing. It takes time, but it's so worth it. James 5:16, make this your common practice, confess your sins to each other, and pray for each other so that you can live together whole and healed. Jesus forgives our sins. That's grace for forgiveness of sin. The healing of pain, of sins I've either committed or sins that have been done to me, the healing of that comes from talking about it, confessing it, working it through with someone who's in your corner, loves you, is for you. And I can't say enough about the man who's that guy on my team, Team Roy, Frank Satius, who's watching, and I just will fuss about that a little bit because that's a treasure. Pastor Frank, I love you so much. Thank you for helping me be whole and healed. We have a couple minutes if we want to just throw this open for some questions or some discussion. You'll have to unmute if you want to do that. I see Dave Keating. How are you, man?
I have a question.
If there isn't any, then we can.
Are you able to hear me? Are you able to hear me? So one question would be, so I started kind of building my team, as you say. I have one really solid guy, and I have a couple other on my farm team, so to speak. And I've tried a little bit, and there's been good reciprocation and of vulnerability and that kind of thing. But do you have any practical ways to test the capability of confidentiality in the people? You know what I mean? I know there's a trust factor kind of falling backwards, but, I'm starting to dip my toe in and my whole foot and my knee, and I'm kind of nervous to go any farther than that at this point with some of the people because, the whole confidentiality factor.
Yeah, I'm laughing because we've chatted a little bit and you can't fast track. I know you want to. We want to move forward. And we hate the element of time. The answer, it's really a great question. And I relate to your wanting to make it go faster. I think just people, confidentiality, again, in church staff, I would recommend going outside of that. But if it's church related, I want to process with somebody who understands and gets church. If it's life related, then it can be, I look for people just that have been successful in life. They could be farther on in life and they're successful in life. They've navigated some stuff. They can be the person to tell you you're going to make it. And sometimes that's all I need to know because they've been where I've been. I don't want someone who hasn't been here trying to tell me. That's one of the things that drives me crazy about COVID and people trying to have answers. It's like none of us have been here, and you get these leaders that are trying to tell you like their experience. No, you're not. You've never been here before. But when there is a voice that's been there. So that's what I would say is look for someone who's been there in the area and you respect, you see a great track record. And by the way, this doesn't come to you, you go to them. And I wouldn't like pop the question, like, will you be that guy in my life? It happens really supernaturally, Dave. It happens really naturally where it just starts to build. And in some cases, I have formally said, I say it this way, I really need you in my life. And so there's an expectation. And can I have more of you? Just to make sure that I'm not building on a false expectation. But that was a great question. All right, I think we can sign off. Hey, I just want to thank everybody for coming in, spending a few minutes as I told my story. I hope it's been helpful. And just let me pray and bless you. Father, in a season of time where emotions are going crazy, one thing I am so thankful about COVID is we're all going through it. And so it's kind of a common thing to phone another pastor or phone a friend and go, and here, I'm really struggling with this. I'm really struggling with this. My wife and I are being tested in areas, or my kids and I, our church and I, there's a commonality of we're in a struggle. And I think that's going to be conducive to be able to open up some vulnerability and not hide when we're hurting with all of our accolades and all of the things that's going right, that it's okay to process what's going wrong. It's painful, it hurts. I want to deal with this so I can move forward. Lord, I pray you would open up avenues for each and every person that's listening today to unclog. And Lord, that they can go from 30% statistic to being 100% open, that we can be ready as leaders to shoulder the people that are coming to church post-COVID that are going to be a mess and a wreck because no one's taught them how to process the pain of their life. Jesus, thank you that you do connect with us. You get us. You know us. You're for us. And that's the up and down portion of the cross that you provided in grace. But I pray we would discover more than ever before the horizontal grace that comes from each other in these days. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. God bless you guys. Great to see y'all.